Post and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. After a week of diplomacy and interactions with G20 guests, India is making moves aimed at those who did not turn up, aka China. India has unveiled 90 infrastructure projects along the border with China. Their significance cannot be overstated. We'll discuss what the projects are and what the strategy behind them is. Meanwhile, the last guest has finally left. Justin Trudeau's plane broke down. Canada sent another plane, but it had to be diverted. Then they sent a technician with spare parts. After a delay of more than 2 days and heaps of ridicule, the Canadian Prime Minister has left India. Meanwhile, Pakistan is accusing another country of providing safe haven to terrorists. Not making this up. Pakistan and their former friends, the Taliban, are locked in a border clash. Rocket man Kim Jongun is in Russia with an elaborate entourage. Macron went to Bangladesh. Is Dhaka getting the Rafale jets? What's cooking between the US and Iran? Is a détente finally underway? In Libya, devastating floods have claimed more than 2,000 lives. And why is the Indian football coach consulting an astrologer to pick the team? We'll discuss all of this and more. The headlines first. Will Vladimir Putin run for re-election in 2024? The Russian president says he will comment after the official announcement later this year. Since the year 2000, Putin has won 4 presidential elections. He also briefly served as the Prime Minister of Russia. China and Russia plan to build a grain hub at the border. The $159 million project is to enhance trade and food security. The deal was signed at the Eastern Economic Forum in Russia's Vladivostok. It's the latest sign of the two neighbors cozying up amid tensions with the West. Israel's top court hears petitions against the controversial judicial reform. It's a full 15-judge panel of the top court. Prime Minister Netanyahu's judicial overhaul plan was first unveiled in January this year. Since then, Israel has been rocked by mass protests. This plan limits the powers of the court. German imports of refined oil products from India soar. This comes amid Europe's sanctions on Russia. Between January and July this year, Berlin bought $480 million worth of petroleum products from India. It's an increase of more than 1,000% from last year. Mount Fuji is under threat. Japan's highest peak is the latest victim of over-tourism. Millions visit the UNESCO heritage site every year. Post-COVID, Mount Fuji has seen a sharp spike in tourists. And in a big boost for India's electronics goals, Apple will sell made-in-India iPhones on launch day for the first time. It's the latest step by the US tech giant to bring its India operations at par with its Chinese ones. The iPhone 15 will be launched later today. We start tonight with India's borders. Recently, China issued a new map. It made sweeping claims on Indian land. Today, India has given a response. India has launched new infrastructure projects along the border. India's Defence Minister was in Jammu today. He unveiled 90 projects, 90. They're spread out across India's border with China. And what kind of projects are these? Well, we have a list. 22 roads, 63 bridges, 1 tunnel, 2 airfields and 2 helipads. So 90 projects in all. India's Border Roads Organisation, or BRO, has built these projects. This is a government department. It maintains road networks in India's border areas, hence the name Border Roads Organisation. And what is the cost of these projects? More than $300 million. This is strategic investment. India needs better infra at the border to deal with the threat that China poses. While talks are on to de-escalate, it's important to be prepared for the worst. Last month, on the sidelines of the BRICS summit in South Africa, Prime Minister Modi and President Xi are said to have reached an agreement, some sort of a deal to de-escalate. But we've seen no forward movement since. In the meantime, the Chinese side has been rapidly expanding infrastructure along the border. We have an assessment. Last year, India's army chief gave some details. His name is General Manoj Pandey. He said China's construction continues unabated. In fact, let me quote from what he said. In terms of infrastructure development, that is going unabated. There is road infrastructure, helipads, airfields, including roads right up to the passes. General Pandey highlighted one project in particular. It's called the G695 road. As of July 2022, China was yet to begin work on this. Now, what is the purpose of this highway? To connect Tibet to Xinjiang. According to the Indian Army assessment, this highway would run parallel to the LAC, the line of actual control, which is the de facto border between India and China. It will give China some unique advantages. They'll be able to move the forces closer to the LAC, also switch deployments from one sector to another. So irrespective of a de-escalation now, if and when it happens, China has long-term plans for this border. The PLA will keep building capacity on its side, and India has no option but to match it. For the Indian Army to be able to defend the border, you need infrastructure, you need connectivity to mobilize troops and to send supplies and reinforcements. China has been building infra for decades now. India started only a few years back. But even in this short period, India has made aggressive strides. Since the standoff in Ladakh began, India has taken a multi-pronged approach. Border connectivity has been improved through new roads, bridges, tunnels, highways, inland waterways, and railroads. And where were these projects commissioned? Along the border with China, in Ladakh, in Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand, Sikkim, and Arunachal Pradesh. So 4 states and 1 union territory. India is building more roads and doing so at a faster pace. Let me show you some data. From 2008 to 2014, India constructed more than 3,600 kilometers of roads. Then from 2014 to 2022, India built more than 6,800 kilometers of roads. So in 8 years, the pace of construction has almost doubled. In addition to the infrastructure, India is adding more defense assets to the region. Recently, India deployed fighter jets in Ladakh, the French Rafales and the Sukhoi 30s. These jets are on high alert and they regularly conduct air patrols. This is to ensure thorough surveillance. In case of any misadventure by the Chinese side, these planes are ready to respond. Apart from this, new programs are being rolled out. This year, India announced a scheme called Vibrant Villages. Now, this is a new strategy. We told you about this. It's aimed at consolidating border areas. The program was announced in the month of April. The budget for this is almost $600 million. The first phase will cover almost 3,000 villages. India plans to build essential infrastructure in these villages. Things like all-weather roads, drinking water supplies, round-the-clock electricity, mobile and internet connectivity, and health and wellness centers. Now, these vibrant villages will be developed in the border regions in 4 states and the Union Territory of Ladakh, the ones that we mentioned. China has been watching India's moves, and it has spoken about the Vibrant Villages plan. China says it, quote-unquote, is firmly against this, which is funny, because China has no say in this. India has every right to develop villages on its side of the border, and this is a game that China started. They challenged India's sovereignty. And now they want to dictate India's moves. Unfortunately for them, it's not happening. When it comes to border infrastructure, India has a lot of catching up to do. But the 90 projects inaugurated today are a good response to China's map war. Speaking of connectivity and infrastructure, a major project was announced on the sidelines of the G20, the India, Middle East, Europe corridor, or the new spice route. The idea is ambitious, to connect Europe to India via the Gulf. The project includes railways, shipping lines, highways, and data cables. It's not just about trade, it's about bringing the two regions closer. As of now, there are 8 partners: India, the United States, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, the European Union, France, Italy, and Germany. Now, this promises to be a game changer for connectivity. But some countries are not happy. Countries like Turkey. Their president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, is opposing the new spice route. He says there can be no corridor without Turkey. So what is Erdogan proposing? Well, he supports another corridor in the region. It's called the Iraq Development Road. The Gulf states are also part of this project. But the route is different. Take a look. The entry point for the new spice route is Dubai. But for Turkey's project, it is Iraq, a port called Al-Faw in the southern Basra province. From this port, trains will take the goods to Turkey and from Turkey to Europe. The project has a budget of $17 billion. It's supposed to create 100,000 jobs. And the returns? More than $4 billion every year. Iraq says this project will be completed by 2029. Now, interesting fact, the UAE is also part of this Iraqi project, which is a bit strange, right? You're part of the new spice route, you're part of the Iraqi project, and you're also part of China's Belt and Road Initiative. But you see, that's the reality of these projects. They're full of competing interests and confusion. We made a list for you. All of these are proposed economic corridors. Number one, the North-South corridor. It's around 7,200 kilometers long. It will connect India to Russia via Iran. The agreement for this was signed way back in 2002. But even today, it's not fully operational. Number two, the Europe-Caucasus-Asia corridor. It includes the European Union and 13 other countries, most of them from Asia and the Caucasus. It was proposed back in 1993, but even today, it's not really a corridor. Number three is the Trans-Caspian corridor. Again, the route is the same, from Central Asia to the Caucasus, and from the Caucasus to Europe. Much like the other two, it's still in the pipeline. Number four is the Northern Sea route. This one connects Asia to Europe via the Arctic. Most of it lies in Russia's economic zone. What do these examples tell you? That economic corridors are tough to make. On paper, they make absolute sense. The trade between Asia and the European Union is more than $2 trillion. Most of it goes through the Suez Canal, so countries are looking for alternatives. Quicker and cheaper alternatives, which is why the spice route is so important. It can cut shipping times by 40%. Let me put that in context for you. Right now, shipments from Mumbai to Europe take around 28 days. That's 4 weeks, 28 days. The new spice route could reduce that to around 16 days, so slightly more than 2 weeks. And in trade, time is money. But before you get excited, let me also tell you this. Such corridors are easier planned than implemented. You have 8 stakeholders here. You have even more participants. All of them have to be on the same pace and on the same page for the project to succeed. Plus, who does what? You need to agree on funding. You need to acquire land. You also need to recruit and mobilize labor. All of this is going to take time. The stakeholders will be meeting again in the next 60 days. They will be charting the next steps. But that's where China's Belt and Road has an advantage. A, it's much older. China began the BRI way back in 2013. They already have an extensive network. And B, it's easier to implement. Just think about it. China does not have to consult anyone about BRI. Their money, their decisions. That's how China works. But with other corridors, it's different. There are multiple stakeholders, so multiple interests at play. To get all of them aligned is tough. Having said that, it's necessary to have these alternatives. China's BRI has plunged countries into debt traps. Xi Jinping has weaponized connectivity. So we need alternatives. The new spice route certainly looks like a solid one. It passes through the stable parts of West Asia like the UAE, Jordan and Israel. Some of the other projects do not. Take the development project which Erdogan is proposing. Most of it runs through Iraq, and in Iraq, stability and safety are major concerns. The spice route's logic and maths certainly check out. It's all about implementation now. Meanwhile, Justin Trudeau's nightmare is over. 2 planes and 36 hours later, he has finally left India. But not without some drama. Trudeau was supposed to leave New Delhi on Sunday. His plane had another plans. A technical snag left him stranded. That same night, Canada sent another jet to New Delhi to pick Trudeau up. But the second jet was also delayed. It was supposed to fly through Rome. Instead, it was diverted to London. So the plane would have arrived only by noon today. Thankfully, it was not needed because Trudeau's team got the primary jet fixed. And wait till you hear how. A technician from Canada flew commercial to India. He brought some parts with him. And with those parts, Trudeau's plane was fixed. Union Minister Rajiv Chandrasekhar was at the airport. He saw the Canadian delegation off. I'm sure there was a visible sigh of relief as the plane took off. Or was there? I ask because this has happened before. Canada's VVIP planes have a sketchy past. It goes all the way back to 1951. Canada's Prime Minister was attending the Commonwealth Conference in France. His plane broke down on the way back. So the Prime Minister was stuck in Iceland. Trudeau himself has had multiple experiences like these. In 2016, he was traveling to Belgium. After flying for half an hour, the plane returned to Ottawa. Why? because of an issue with the flap. In 2018, there was more trouble. Trudeau's plane was refueling in Rome during his trip to India. Same problem as this time. Some technical snag stranded him for 2 hours. In 2019, there was a third instance. His plane was damaged inside the Air Force hangar. Guess how? Because the plane rolled into the hangar wall. Why does this keep happening? Well, social media says it's karma. But the real reason is old technology. Canada uses 2 Airbus Polaris jets to transport VVIPs. They were bought in the 1980s. Canada's Air Force began using them in the early 1990s. It's not exactly a spring chicken. But Trudeau is not the first leader to face plane troubles. In fact, there is a long list. Like former German Chancellor Angela Merkel, her flight was grounded by multiple issues in 2018. As a result, she was late to the G20 summit. Something about the G20s, I guess. In 1994, South Africa's president Nelson Mandela had a scare. He was flying on a propeller plane. Around 20 minutes before landing, one of the engines failed. Apparently, Mandela was unfazed. He kept reading his newspaper. The pilot somehow managed to perform an emergency landing. Recently, the German foreign minister had plane troubles. She was on a trip to the Pacific last month. The plane made a refueling stop in Abu Dhabi, and that was it. The aircraft developed a mechanical issue. The minister was stuck there for 18 hours and the trip had to be cancelled. But Trudeau's plane troubles are more than just fate. They've taken a political turn. Yesterday we told you why. Trudeau got an earful when he met Prime Minister Modi. His handling of Khalistani elements was criticised. The Indian statement spells out what Modi said. But the Canadian statement, well, it doesn't even mention it. So clearly Trudeau was embarrassed. As he should be. Trudeau met Prime Minister Modi on Sunday, the same day Khalistanis held a referendum in Canada. It was organised by SFJ, that Sikhs for Justice. It's a Khalistani outfit. The group is banned here in India, but in Canada it's thriving. Rallies, referendums, you name it. They do all of it. Trudeau and his government are ready to defend them. He was asked about these separatist elements working out of Canada, and this was Trudeau's reply.
Obviously, Canada will always defend freedom of expression, freedom of conscience, freedom of peaceful protest. That's something that's extremely important to us. At the same time as we're always there to prevent violence, to push back against hatred.
Poor old Justin Trudeau, bound by Western values of expression and conscience. Except he isn't. Another Western leader was asked this same question about Khalistani extremism in his country. It was British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. Look at his response.
No form of extremism or violence like that is acceptable in the UK, and that's why we are working very closely with the Indian government to particularly tackle PKE, pro-Khalistan extremism. I don't think it's right. Our security minister recently was just in India talking to his counterparts. We have working groups together to share intelligence and information.
One hides behind freedom of expression, another promises zero tolerance. Both are Western leaders. Sunak is not doing anything special here. He's doing what any prime minister should, cracking down on extremism, or at least saying that he will. Trudeau cannot even bring himself to say that. Tells you what his motives are. Not values or freedoms, just pure old politics. Justin Trudeau's opposition has sensed that he is weak. Even on this plane issue, they have been relentless. So what does Trudeau do? He falls back on his Khalistani allies. In fact, let me show you some numbers. These are the results from Canada's general elections, the latest one. Trudeau's party got 32% of the popular vote. The main opposition, they got more than 33% of the vote. But Trudeau has a trump card, his ally called Jagmeet Singh. He's a prominent Khalistani politician. His party got around 17% of the vote in Canada. Without Jagmeet Singh, Justin Trudeau cannot be Prime Minister of Canada. So the equation is pretty obvious. Yet, Trudeau hides behind freedom of expression. It may help him win elections, but it won't win him friends in New Delhi. Speaking of friends, Pakistan is losing one that it nurtured, the Taliban in Kabul. Their relationship has evolved over the years, from proteges to friends to challengers. That's what the Taliban have now become, challengers. And Rawalpindi is feeling betrayed. They're making some very serious accusations. Pakistan says the Taliban is violating their sovereignty. I can think of a million memes with the word karma, but I'll tell you what the story is about. The Taliban and Pakistan are engaged in a border clash. This is at a crossing called Torkham. It's a major checkpoint on the Pakistan-Afghanistan border. And right now, it is closed. Pakistan shut it about a week ago, and they're refusing to open it. Last Wednesday, there was a gun battle here. A clash between the Pakistani military and the Taliban. The firefight went on for 2 hours. 4 Pakistani soldiers were killed. Islamabad responded by closing this checkpoint. But how did this fight begin? Pakistan blames the Taliban. They say the provocation came from the Afghan side. What provocation? Land grab. Honestly, Pakistan should not mind because they've been occupying Indian territory for decades. But as it happens, they are complaining. They say the Taliban started building another border post. It is close to the main crossing at Torkham, and the Taliban started building it without telling Pakistan. Islamabad says this structure is unlawful. It violates Pakistani sovereignty and it falls inside Pakistani territory. In other words, the Taliban is grabbing Pakistani land. That is the complaint. Yesterday, Islamabad issued a new statement, a message to the Taliban. Let me quote and listen to this carefully. We expect the Afghan interim authorities to be mindful of Pakistan's concerns, respect the territorial integrity of Pakistan, and ensure that the Afghan territory is not used as a launching pad for terrorist attacks against Pakistan. This is epic. Pakistan is accusing another country of using their territory as a launching pad for terror attacks. The tables have turned, and how? Pakistan's foreign ministry is crying foul. It says terrorists are attacking Pakistan from Afghanistan and the Taliban is looking the other way. And that's not all. Islamabad is preaching the Taliban about territorial integrity and the Taliban are having none of it. They blame Pakistan for the current tensions. The Taliban say they were just repairing an outpost on their side, but Pakistan fired upon them unprovoked. In fact, Kabul too has issued a statement to this effect. It says Pakistan is not living up to the values of a good neighbor. We say this is a ready-made script for a political comedy. Although this dispute is no laughing matter, lives and livelihoods are at stake here. These tensions are fueling protests. One of the protests happened in Nangarhar. This is an Afghan province. It is quite close to the Torkham area. The protesters want the border crossing to be reopened. And who are the protesters? Most of them are traders, sellers of fruits and vegetables. These are perishable products, and these traders are unable to move their harvest. The border standoff is causing them huge losses. The Torkham crossing is an important trade route. Goods worth over $2 million cross this checkpoint every day. So if the crossing remains closed, everyone suffers losses. As we speak, a large number of trucks are stranded at the checkpoint. There's only one way to resolve this, through diplomacy. Both sides met on Sunday. They tried to break the deadlock, but they failed. You see, diplomacy is not a strong suit of either side. Pakistan trained the Taliban to fire guns, not deliver the talking table. Now they're suffering the consequences. And this is an old dispute, by the way. The Pakistan-Afghanistan border is called the Durand Line. It's more than 2,600 kilometers long. It was drawn up by the British. Pakistan accepts this line. Afghanistan does not. Now, when the Taliban took over, Pakistan hoped that they would accept the Durand Line. But that's not happening. In the month of June, Taliban's defense minister gave an interview. His name is Maulvi Muhammad Yaqub Mujahid. He was asked about the Durand Line. He ended up trashing it. Mujahid said the Durand Line is not a border, it is just a line. And throughout this year, the Taliban and their proxy, the Pakistani Taliban, have challenged this boundary. They have launched attacks. They have targeted security officials. In recent months, Pakistan has tried to fence this border. This is to stop cross-border attacks and smuggling. And how much of the border has been fenced? 97% according to Pakistan. But the Taliban has challenged that too. Reports say they have tried to cut the border fencing, even removed some of the barriers. So the discord has been festering for a while. It has now blown up. Islamabad once thrived on the chaos in Afghanistan. It is now struggling to contain it. And now let's move from friends turned foes to friends in need. North Korea's Supreme Leader Kim Jongun is in Russia. He crossed the border this morning. He's in Russia to meet President Vladimir Putin. The meeting could take place in the far eastern city of Vladivostok. Putin is there for the Eastern Economic Forum. And on the sidelines of the forum, he's expected to court Kim. What is the purpose of this meeting? Reports say it's about weapons. Putin reportedly needs arms and ammunition for the war in Ukraine. And apparently he's turning to the militarized hermit kingdom for help. Will the deal go ahead, though? What will be the consequences and what will Kim demand in exchange? Our next report has all the details.
Kim Jong-un is in Russia. His fancy green bulletproof train has crossed the North Korea-Russia border. He's now chugging along through Russia's Far East, heading to a meeting with Vladimir Putin. Kim began the journey with great fanfare. North Korean media released these pictures of his departure. The military even gave him a special send-off ceremony. Kim is on a mission to get the best deal possible for his destitute country. The North Korean leader finally seems to have a bargaining chip. The Hermit Kingdom may actually hold the key to the future direction of the war in Ukraine. Russia has been pulverizing Ukraine for almost 20 months now. That level of constant bombardment requires weapons. Its stockpiles are getting used up. So it seems Russia now seeks arms and ammunition from North Korea. This is what the West thinks anyway.
I think it's fair to say that having to travel across the length of his own country to ask,
but it's still his own country.
Yeah,
so,
I know, to meet with an international pariah, to ask for assistance in a war that he expected to win in the opening month. Look, I would characterize it as him begging for assistance.
Putin is in the far eastern city of Vladivostok, officially for the Eastern Economic Forum. In normal years, it's a large affair with visits from multiple heads of state. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has attended in the past, as did former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. But this year, the Russian forum is a low-key affair, and Kim Jong-un is the only head of state due in Vladivostok. And he isn't even attending the forum. His meeting with Putin is taking place on the sidelines, and the West is closely watching it.
I will remind both countries that any transfer of arms from North Korea to Russia would be in violation of multiple United Nations Security Council resolutions. And we, of course, have aggressively enforced our sanctions against entities that fund Russia's war effort, and we will continue to enforce those sanctions and will not hesitate to impose new sanctions if appropriate.
He has a point. There are UN Security Council resolutions banning arms purchases from North Korea. Moscow itself voted to impose these restrictions. So if any weapons deal goes through, it'll face sanctions that it agreed upon. But Russia already faces a ton of sanctions for its war on Ukraine. And North Korea? The Hermit Kingdom has been drowning in sanctions for years. How much more damage can extra sanctions really do? So, is there really much for the countries to lose? Especially compared to what there is to gain. Russia will get weapons and ammunition, supplies that it needs for a shot in the arm in Ukraine. And North Korea can get a whole lot more. Kim's kingdom is facing a food crisis. The recent typhoons in the region have made it worse. Also, North Korea isn't exactly known for a stellar development record. It has missiles and artillery, but reportedly lacks electricity. So if a deal does materialize with Russia, Kim might receive food and power in exchange. When it comes to North Korea, however, there's always a nuclear agenda lurking under the surface. It's no secret that Pyongyang wants to become a nuclear power. It keeps testing nukes, making nuclear-capable missiles and submarines and everything in between. So will Kim ask for a boost to his nuclear program? Probably. But will Putin accept? That's the real question. Forgive the cliché, but we'll have to wait and watch.
After the G20, many world leaders took a detour. Instead of going home, they visited other countries. US President Joe Biden went to Vietnam. French President Emmanuel Macron headed to Bangladesh. It was a very important visit, the first one by a French president in 33 years. As always, Macron hit the right notes. He visited a memorial to Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, Bangladesh's founder and also Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina's father. His talks with Hasina covered a number of issues like defense, trade and the Indo-Pacific. There is speculation that Bangladesh could buy Rafale jets, the same ones that India has. So what exactly is brewing here? To understand that, we must understand Macron's ambitions. He unveiled an Indo-Pacific strategy in 2018, the only European leader to do so. He sees France as an Indo-Pacific power, not a US ally in the region, but a power in its own right. So in Dhaka, Macron talked about a third way, one that is different from China and the US. Listen to this.
We have a common desire to safeguard the independence of our countries, to not give in to any external pressure, and despite all current conflicts, to basically safeguard our freedom of sovereignty. As you know, I stand up for this third way in the Indo-Pacific region, based on the respect of sovereignty and the strategic autonomy of our partners.
And how did Sheikh Hasina respond? The Bangladeshi Prime Minister emphasized on regional stability. She said French and Bangladeshi leaders will play responsible roles.
To ensure the geopolitical stability in the Pacific region, leaderships in both Bangladesh and France will play responsible roles.
Where do the fighter jets come in? Bangladesh has announced a plan to modernize its military. They're buying fighter jets. 16 of them have been bought from China, the Chengdu J-7 jets. But Dhaka wants more. They want Western fighter jets in their arsenal too. And reports say it's down to two options, the Eurofighter Typhoon or the French Rafale. Paris may or may not get the fighter jet deal, but they have already scored another one. Bangladesh is buying 10 Airbus planes from France. The deal is worth around $3.2 billion. It is also symbolic. Bangladesh's flag carrier operates 20 planes. Most of them are American Boeings. But now Dhaka is going French. Beyond these deals, what are the political gains for President Macron? Well, Bangladesh is an Indo-Pacific country. It has a coastline of 720 kilometers, and right now it's hot property. Russia is building nuclear plants in Bangladesh. China has invested around $10 billion in this country. And then, of course, you have India, arguably Dhaka's most important partner. From the looks of it, President Macron also wants a piece of this. He visited the Pacific Islands in July. He also made a stopover in Sri Lanka. So the Indo-Pacific is firmly on his agenda. But will Dhaka buy his third way? A lot depends on how India plays this. Recently, the United States slapped sanctions on Bangladeshi officials. The reason? Alleged election interference. Washington wants a clean and fair election next year in Bangladesh. Dhaka says it's none of your business. So the relations were a bit frosty leading up to this weekend. But then came the G20. India invited Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina as a guest. And in New Delhi, she met multiple Western leaders, including US President Joe Biden. In fact, Biden took a selfie with Hasina and her daughter. She also had an interaction with Rishi Sunak. These pictures went viral. Sunak was seen kneeling beside the Bangladeshi Prime Minister. Such interactions are quite important. They allow frank conversations between leaders. They also prevent misunderstandings. At the G20, Bangladesh was also included in the Biofuel Alliance. Other members include the US, Italy and the UAE. And India facilitated all of this. I'm sure Dhaka knows this. New Delhi can leverage its relations with the West to lobby for Bangladesh. And why is that important? Because the West is a huge market for Dhaka. Look at their top export destinations. Out of the top 10, 9 are Western countries. China does not even figure in this list. And most of this export is garments. If you see clothes in Europe or the US, most of them will say made in Bangladesh. So Dhaka needs the Western market. It's a question of who can provide the rest. I'm talking about investments and infrastructure, even defense equipment. Bangladesh is a proud country that was born out of war. They don't take kindly to foreign meddling. We know the West specializes in that. We also know that China does not care, which is why India's role is quite important. New Delhi will be hoping to strike a fine balance. On the one hand, keep Western pressure off Bangladesh, maybe even bring in some investments. On the other, keep Bangladesh within India's sphere of influence. You don't want to be ceding space, not even to allies like France or the US. It's a tough balance. But in the face of China's challenge, it could be India's only option. When Joe Biden came to power in 2021, he promised to revive the Iran nuclear deal. His plan was quite simple: ditch the maximum pressure policy that Donald Trump pursued and, quote unquote, bring America back. That was Biden's plan. But 3 years later, the US is no closer to Iran. The nuclear deal is still off the table, and there is still hostility between the two sides. Washington is trying to change that, and that too silently. Today, the US made a decision. $6 billion of Iran's frozen funds will be released. $6 billion. This will facilitate a prisoner swap between the two countries, Iran and the US. Is this the beginning of a US-Iran détente? Here's a report.
Iran and the US have been at odds over a lot of issues. There's the nuclear deal. There's the US military presence in the Gulf. Then there's the killing of Qasem Soleimani. The two sides usually don't see eye to eye. But now they're on the verge of a historic prisoner swap. At the center of this deal is Qatar. They're the ones mediating this deal. So, how will it work? Of course, both sides have some demands. Iran's demands included access to its frozen assets. And it looks like Washington has now relented. The US has allowed the release of $6 billion in frozen funds. Secretary of State Antony Blinken signed off on the waiver on September 8th. After that, the US Congress was notified about it. So, does this mean that the US is wiring money to Iran? Not really. Tehran won't have access to the funds directly. The funds are currently being held in South Korean banks. They'll be moved from there to a bank account in Qatar. Iran will be able to access it from there, but only for food and humanitarian needs. Qatar and the US will oversee this. According to sources, the money transfer was the trickiest part. The US had to make sure it did not bypass sanctions. So the idea was to give the responsibility to Doha. They'll make sure that Iran does not spend the cash on sanctioned items. But now that the money hurdle has been crossed, it's time for the real deal, the prisoner swap between the US and Iran.
We confirmed that Iranian authorities released 5 US citizens from prison to house arrest: Simak Namazi, Murad Tabaz, Imad Shargi, and 2 Americans who wish to remain private. Most have been in prison since before this administration took office. 1 has been held for nearly 8 years. None should have been detained in the first place.
5 US-Iranian dual nationals could be freed from Iran. A similar number of Iranian prisoners will also be heading home. Prisoners from both sides would transit through Qatar. There's no confirmation from the US yet. So, no details on when or how the 5 Americans and 5 Iranians will be swapped. But reports suggest it will happen soon.
We are optimistic that the prisoner swap with America will happen in the near future based on the agreement we had.
Of course, the move met with some backlash in the US. The Republicans called the money transfer a ransom payment. While the Biden administration acknowledges that they're making difficult decisions, they say that the priority is bringing Americans home. Plus, it could be a huge win for Biden ahead of the 2024 elections. So, does this mean that US-Iran tensions are cooling off? Well, it is a moment of rare cooperation, and the two sides are engaging more, especially on things like the nuclear deal. But will the quiet diplomatic push work out for both sides in the long run? Only time will tell.
Now let's turn our attention to Libya, a country of 6 million people where a powerful storm has unleashed catastrophic floods. They're ripping through the eastern city of Derna and affecting at least 6 other cities. More than 2,000 people are dead, around 6,000 are missing, 2 dams have collapsed, entire neighborhoods have simply been washed away. Footage shows buildings erased, cars submerged, and torrents of water rushing through the streets. Authorities say they did not anticipate a disaster of this scale. Our next report tells you more.
Entire neighborhoods simply washed away. Torrents of water rushing through the streets. collapsing buildings, submerging cars, and killing at least 2,000 people, with about 6,000 missing. This devastation has befallen Libya, a North African country home to about 6 million people. A powerful storm has unleashed massive floods, which led to the collapse of 2 aging dams. This released a swollen, fast-moving river.
Dams collapsed in the south of Derna. It caused water to flow into Wadi Derna inside the city. 3 bridges collapsed completely and water spread inside the neighborhoods. There are entire neighborhoods that moved to the sea, including their residents.
Now floods are ripping through the eastern city of Derna. It is the worst hit, but several other cities have been affected as well, including Al-Baida, Al-Marj, Tobruk, Takinis, Beta and Benghazi. Several bridges have been destroyed. 3 collapsed completely. Entire residential areas have been erased. Buildings that once stood back from the river have now collapsed into the mud. Strong muddy currents are seen across cities carrying debris, vehicles and trees. Many families are stuck under the rubble. Bodies can be seen lying around or floating in the waters. Phone lines in some cities including Derna are down, and this complicates search and rescue efforts. For starters, the authorities say they did not anticipate a disaster of this scale, so they were unprepared. Experts say they hadn't studied weather conditions well. They did not take stock of the seawater levels and wind speeds either. So evacuation measures weren't taken in time. Families in the path of the storm remained as they were, and they bore the brunt of the government's failings. As flooding grew more severe, people started being evacuated, but rescuers are unable to enter several regions. Teams are scrambling to find survivors. International aid is pouring in to help Libya. Turkey has said it will mobilize search personnel. The United Arab Emirates is also rushing aid and rescue teams. The US says it is determining how to assist Libya. Meanwhile, Egypt has extended its condolences while learning a lesson or two from the Libyan tragedy, because the weather system is expected to move away from Libya soon and head east towards Egypt. Cairo has already begun preparations to minimize impact of the storm and hopefully avert the destruction facing Libya.
The days right before any football game are crucial, not just for the team but also for the coach, who has to build strategies, choose the best players for the game and prepare them efficiently both mentally and physically. It's a tough job, which is why some coaches need a helping hand. But no one expects an astrologer to play assistant coach. It sounds bizarre, but this is not a fictional story. It happened for real. The coach in question is a man called Igor Stimac. He's India's national football team coach. Reports say a few days before some crucial games, he consulted an astrologer. He based important decisions on astrological insights. Now, questions on integrity and propriety are being raised, and one does not need an astrologer to predict that reaction. Here's more.
It was Thursday, June 9th, 2022. Only 48 hours remained before India would face Afghanistan. The two countries would battle in the Asian Cup qualifier. It was a crucial match. India needed to win to remain in contention for the championship. India's national football team coach Igor Stimac knew just how high the stakes were. So he asked a dear friend for help. He dropped a text message saying, "Hi dear friend, you can check charts for each player from the list for 11 June. Kickoff time is at 20:30. Within hours, a response came. The name of each player against adjective, heavy remarks. For one player, the remark said good. For the next, very good day but might get over-aggressive. For another, not recommended for the day. Who was on the other end of this conversation? Stimac had texted an astrologer. Bhupesh Sharma from Delhi. Yes, same vibe as Seema Taparia from Mumbai. One is an astrologer, another is a matchmaker. One working on the playing field, another in the battlefield of love. But do either hold any real power? The answer remains inconclusive. The list Stimach was talking about in this message referred to the names of the probable 11 for the qualifier game. Sharma shared his advice for each name. When the team was declared, 2 established names were dropped. Their stars weren't favourable, quite literally, but mainly according to the astrologer. This conversation was not a one-off. Reports say that between May and June last year, Stimach and Sharma exchanged about 100 messages. India played 4 matches during this period. A friendly against Jordan, followed by 3 Asian Cup qualifiers against Cambodia, Afghanistan and Hong Kong. Before each game, Stimach was in touch with Sharma. Reports say Sharma was paid about $18,000 or 15 lakh rupees for his work. Now, sports figures are known to be superstitious. Their rituals can be funny, gross, or even downright creepy. For instance, tennis star Serena Williams doesn't change her socks even once during a tournament. Men's basketball coach Jerry Tarkanian constantly chewed on a towel during games. And baseball player Moises Alou urinated on his own hands before games. Some also refer to astrologers. But here's the thing. When a coach does it to take crucial decisions that affect a team and a country, it can quickly go from bizarre to problematic. Stimach's messages raise some big questions. This isn't only an issue of integrity, but also propriety. Crucial team information was shared with an outsider. The All India Football Federation wouldn't be too happy after knowing this. But here's the catch. Stimach was introduced to the astrologer by a top AIFF official. As of now, neither Stimach nor the AIFF have commented on the reports. Now, we can't predict what they would say, but we don't need an astrologer to know that it would surely be interesting.
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. In Portugal, roads turned into rivers of wine. 2.2 million litres of wine flowed through the streets after a massive spill. In Morocco, people slept on the streets of Marrakesh days after the country's biggest earthquake. The death toll stands at nearly 3,000 as Morocco scrambles for aid. And an Indian Air Force tanker refueled fighter aircraft of the Egyptian Air Force mid-air. This was part of the military exercise Bright Star 23. Finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1959, the Soviet Union launched the Luna 2 space probe. This was the Soviet Union's second attempt to reach the moon. It was the first man-made spacecraft to reach the moon. We're leaving you on that note. It's goodbye from our Mumbai studio. Thank you very much for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye.
Só pode ter sido mal. Foi ataque, rebentou. E o perigo aqui está.
chosen is not being fulfilled yet. So what's the need for such precast toilets is the question that is being raised by the citizens of Bengaluru. What is seen as a high-end luxury project undertaken by the BBMP, the Bengaluru Civic Agency is constructing around 46 precast high-end toilets across the IT city with a whopping cost of 281 crore, with each precast toilet costing around 4 to 5 crores. Now behind me is one such precast toilet that was proposed and built by the BBMP under phase 1. So it comprises of various features such as providing dry and clean toilets, sensor based flushing, solar powered lights and also ample ventilation. So these are the features that make up these high-end precast toilets proposed and built by the BBMP under phase 1. Right now the BBMP has proposed to construct 46 such new toilets, new precast toilets, which cost around 281 crore. So let's go inside and check what are the features of these high-end precast toilets that cost around that makes each toilet cost around 6 crores, around 4 to 5 to 6 crores. So it comprises of a sensor based flushing. So you have the sensor here. So usually the other BBMP toilets have a push button water feature. Now this has a sensor based flushing, so that's one of the feature. And the phase 2 of this particular high-end precast toilet comprises of water saving taps, but this is built under phase 1 and it's not in a good condition, not maintained in a good condition. The BBMP says that in the second phase, the high-end precast toilets comprise of water saving tap fixtures, and this is a particular precast toilet is also said to be solar powered. You have the solar powered lights that are fixated there, and what the BBMP claims is also that it provides ample amount of ventilation. It doesn't look like it has a ample amount of ventilation here, except the fact that there are just 2 to 3 glass windows that have been placed here. So these are the features. Now this particular precast toilet is being built under the phase 1. In phase 2 now the BBMP is proposing to build around 46 toilets which cost around 281 crores, so that which I mentioned earlier. So now what's under question is the inflated cost of this particular proposed precast toilets that are being built. Now as I mentioned, under phase 2 46 new precast toilets are going to be built and the total cost will be around 281 crores, which is equal to that of a luxury apartment. Now each toilet will cost around 4 to 5 crores. Now the question is why the inflated cost? Remember, at the very same time you have the Bengaluru Developmental Minister who is saying that there are no sufficient funds for new developmental works. When such is the financial state, why the inflated cost for such precast toilets, high-end precast toilets that are being proposed and built, and are these toilets worth it, is the question that is being raised. And at the very same time, the second reason, the main reason why such project is undertaken as claimed by the BBMP is that these can be built at a short span of time. Now if you take a look at the phase 1 that was being built, around only
So the Delhi G20 has been a success, a resounding one at that, by every yardstick that is imaginable. And one of the chief architects behind that success is now joining me, External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar. Thank you very much. And many congratulations to you and your team.
Well, thank you very much
for what has been hard work over the last 1 year plus. What does it feel like scoring a test match 100?
Well, I don't know about that, but I think at one level, yes, there is a lot of satisfaction that what was a very high profile, very complex event logistically was pulled off. But I think more than that, it is also that at a very difficult time in the global political environment, we were able to actually get the 20 most important countries to actually reach a consensus on a crucial set of issues, which is very important, to set the directions of where the world is going to be going for the rest of the decade.
So all the focus, of course, has been on the joint declaration, and 12 hours before the declaration was officially adopted, negotiators were still not sure whether they would arrive at it. So give us, what was the inside story? How did it actually come through?
Well, I don't know about 12 hours. I can tell you it was much closer than that.
Much closer than 12 hours.
I mean, let me roll back here a bit. It was not that we thought a declaration wouldn't come out, but because I think somewhere all of us certainly the team we had, Sherpa, myself, and I kept PM apprised from time to time what was happening. We had a sense eventually that we'll get there. But having said that, you have to get there.
Yes.
And what would happen is, it's like, oh, we have it nailed down, and then something else would happen, and then we'd say, no, somebody is bracketed. So it was never done till it's done, and that kept coming closer and closer and closer. So much so that even in the forenoon of that day,
on Saturday morning,
9th September, while session 1 was going on, we still had some issues to be nailed down. So